For chapter 25 of The Wrong 10 Seconds, we're backtracking just a little bit to Charlie before, during, and after the spectacular scenes at the Harrow residence in the last chapter. Chapter 25, Charlie, Friday. The promised rain hadn't come, despite the bulging, stony clouds overhead. Storms of doubt burst in Charlie's mind as he thrashed in his sweaty bed. He couldn't decipher whether Harriet's breath laboured with the normal weight of sleep, or something more ominous. What if Lydia's suspicions were correct, that Harriet was unwell and Charlie had ignored the signs? He'd take her to the doctor's surgery tomorrow, but it might get out of hand like all those commenters online, like half the carers at the agency. If Harriet turned out just to be overheated, they would say he was a foreigner wasting their time. Charlie threw off his sheet and fumbled for his water glass on the nightstand. The community officer's riddle assent had been nice enough. Charlie had struggled, at their insistence, to recount what the assailants had said. After screwing up so badly when he tried to explain himself before, it seemed risky trying again. But they had listened. Riddle had listened. Charlie clutched his glass. Shouldn't he allow his own wife to hear his story as well? Fernley Brook Nursing Home sounded good from what he'd read online. That didn't mean it was good enough for Harriet. She was sticking around for him. He ought to stick around for her. Face it, by checking out early, he wouldn't be protecting her as much as protecting himself from admitting his shortcomings. Sitting on the side of his bed, Charlie braced his hands either side of him. He took a deep breath. "It's not really about the dog, babe," he said to Harriet as she slept. "You already know that. My biggest regret is every lunch I sold that day 3 years ago, every pint I pulled robbed me of you, while more of your incredible brain struggled for air." He rubbed tears away. "And I've been trying to make up for letting that happen, but I can't. Nothing I do has the value of you walking and talking beside me. What you need to know is, and God, I hope you do, I don't look after you to try and redeem myself. Being with you is so much more. It's what keeps my own poor brain going, I guess." Expressing these things, vital as they were, felt like uncovering a still open wound. He cried until exhaustion overtook him, and slept through the 5 o'clock turn, jolting awake to the sound of the doorbell. Charlie pulled on some clothes, looking anxiously at Harriet. She stirred at the noise, pasted to her bed not only by her crippled nervous system, but also a ring of sweat. Her cheeks glowed pink, and her hair curled in every direction. He dreamed of her. She was always 21 in his dreams, like when they met. In this one, she'd been taken hostage, and Celia insisted the kidnappers would not release Harriet because Charlie had forgotten to make coffee at the pub. He looked through every cupboard, finding Lydia stuck inside one, and Alfie hanging lazily in a hammock above their heads, but he couldn't find the coffee ransom to get Harriet back. Now, Charlie shuddered, kissed her cheek, and hobbled for the door. "Hiya." It was Miss Hollyoaks, the teenage soap-addicted carer. "All right," she asked, stepping inside, her charcoal eyes heavy-lidded, possibly weighed down by the makeup. "Hi, yes, sorry, what are you doing here?" "I got a shift, didn't I?" She peeked into the lounge as if to check the telly was still there, then into the bedroom. "Morning, Mrs. S." "But you haven't turned up for a week." Charlie tucked in his t-shirt and hesitantly shut the door. What must the neighbours think? Him wearing pyjama bottoms, windows still cracked, now entertaining a young girl. Soon there'd be others accusing him of paedophilia. "Been ill?" The girl snapped her gum and set down her bag. "You didn't ring or anything. I assumed you simply left like the others. Because, you know, I chased that dog away. There's a video?" She shook her head, her short, bleached and purple-highlighted pigtails waggling. "Nothing to do with my job, is it? What are you going to do? Work the hoist all on your own? That's well dangerous." I've managed it before, but..." Charlie followed Miss Hollyoaks into the dark bedroom and opened the curtains. "I apologise for my unkempt attire. I overslept badly, and I'm sorry to say it's been several hours since I turned Harriet." Harriet blinked up at them and moaned hoarsely. "Are you all right, my love?" Charlie asked her. "It's still terribly hot, isn't it?" He swept her hair from her face, then knelt to check her overnight catheter bag. The contents were dark. An infection or full-scale dehydration. The shower chair rumbled from the wet room, the girl pushing it, already aproned and gloved. Charlie rose, grimacing at his knees. She'd laid out towels and a sundress for Harriet, too. "You're quite efficient, aren't you?" Miss Hollyoaks shrugged. I've been doing it forever. My mum had cancer, and first she lost her leg. I looked after her till she died. My God, Charlie stared. I'm so sorry. Gave me some good skills, I guess. She positioned the hoist and produced the sling. My stepdad weren't no use, so I worked it out myself. He drinks so much, needs caring for half the time anyway, and then he goes a bit funny. He steals my phone, that's why I can't call in. Charlie pulled Harriet's upper body toward him so Miss Hollyoaks, Amy, according to her name badge, could slip the sling under her. Let's get you up, my love, give you a cool shower, and then we can get you to the doctor, perhaps. She gave a hum of acquiescence. Amy hooked the sling loops to the hoist. Going up, Mrs. S. As he guided Harriet to her shower chair, Amy working the hoist buttons, Charlie considered Marie's unsupported boyfriend and Gemma's previous fight with breast cancer. You carers really are the most remarkable people. Amy shot him a look over Harriet as she lowered her into the seat. You're one of us, though, aren't you? All the time. Well, by default, I suppose. Charlie undid one of the sling loops in the same time it took Amy to undo the other three, and before he knew it, she was whisking the thing away. Alarm sharpened Harriet's expression. Steady, love, he murmured. She knows what she's doing. You're not a bad person or anything, Amy called from the wet room, adjusting the shower temperature while Charlie peeled Harriet's soaked nightdress away. I'd tell other people, but I figured they wouldn't believe me. Yes, sighed Charlie, that's what I'm worried about. Within half an hour, Amy had helped shower, dress, and hoist Harriet into her wheelchair. She hopped along to her next client, and Lydia turned up just after Charlie got Riddle on the line. Do you honestly think you can get these Harrow people to let things go? He was asking. It's within everyone's interest. I can make a compelling case, but the mother's stubborn and the girl follows her. And the father? I've met him before. He seemed nice. I've barely heard him say a word, to tell you the truth. I see. He said something to me about how he couldn't get close to his family because they're so insanely high-powered. Charlie swept his gaze around the room, at Harriet resting between the fans. She'd been powerful, formidable, but she drew people in rather than pushing them away. So I wasn't sure if he might be able to... Charlie's eyes fell on Lydia. She'd turned ghostly white, shaking despite the heat. I'm sorry, Ian, something's come up. I have to go. Liddy lady. He leapt up, limping past the pain shooting through his knee. What's wrong? She sank with him onto the settee. I'm fine. Sorry. How's Mum? Her voice cracked. You think you can fool me, of all people, with such poor acting? What is it? His daughter wept on his shoulder. I'm sorry, Daddy. I've had a bad breakup, and it's hard, and I hate it. When? With whom? Charlie looked over at Harriet, who now held her head up with the keenest awareness possible. Last week, he disappeared. He didn't even... I guess he couldn't bring himself to... Lydia snatched a handful of tissues from the box on a side table. That's terrible. How could Charlie have been so clueless? His insides writhed. That's when that video... Was this because of what I did? No, but she didn't meet his eyes. I think it must have been, he said. No, Daddy. With a final shiver, Lydia lowered the sopping tissues to her lap. I had to keep the relationship hidden for 2 years. There were bigger complications than that dog. 2 years? Charlie reeled. Why didn't you tell us about him? Was he mistreating you? Lydia? He combed his fingers through her brown hair, soft as Harriet's. Never. He was wonderful. It's just there was more to the world than us. Harriet sounded a woeful hum of agreement. Charlie rose and got her tea. Did you know about this then? Were you two girls in on this together? I reckon she was on to me. Harriet blinked slowly, as if she'd had her suspicions indeed. My clever love, sighed Charlie, and I was too wrapped up in... Don't worry about that. Lydia squeezed his hand. It's not actually your job to be on top of everything. Mum and I like to share a secret or two. Charlie paused, tipping the beaker up for Harriet. However clear, the instruction not to blame himself was difficult to follow through. That's very gracious of you, he murmured. Well, I came by it honestly. Where do we stand with Riddle's investigation? He seems optimistic, but he says the girl and her mother are stubborn. Charlie rinsed the cup. To be honest, I don't hold out much hope. Nor me. Lydia stood. I'm so sorry. I made things a lot worse with my bad advice. Please. I was only too happy to ignore the problem. keep myself busy and hope it would all go away. And I've seen it not work before. Charlie looked sadly at Harriet. She gazed back, comprehension dimming as her eyelids lowered. He took Lydia's arm. Could you come with me a moment? He showed her Harriet's nighttime catheter bag, which he hadn't emptied yet. The washing machine whirred the sheets, and a fly battled the closed half of the window. You were right. She's not well, and I was ignoring signs again. Partly because I wasn't sure if she was just fed up with me, being out of work and hanging around her all day. She's not fed up with you. He polished his glasses. She couldn't say if she were, though. This is Mum we're talking about. She may be paralysed and speechless, but she would find a way to warn you if she was getting cross. It seems I can ignore her signals as persistently as she tries to communicate them. Can you help me get her to the GP? First things first. She's taking in fluids, right? Yes, definitely. Any redness around the catheter area? He straightened the towels on their rack and mopped up the wash basin with some toilet roll. A bit, yes. I wasn't sure what to put on it, so I left it. Charlie threw the paper toward the bin, but missed, and she saved him from bending by disposing of it for him. Sorry, sweetie, I can't stand... Lydia straightened, her voice brittle. I get it, but if we pretend Mum's not in the state she's in, don't we risk minimizing what she's going through? You know I don't want to do that. Charlie touched her cheek. You're great at this. You work so hard. But it was difficult enough for your mother to get used to strangers coming in and caring for her, knowing everything about her body and discussing it like an inanimate object. She doesn't want you in that role. Lydia nodded, her eyes to the floor. Okay, I'm guessing she's got a UTI. I can run a test. I've got dipsticks in my car. Then you call up the GP and get antibiotics. By midday, Harriet had taken her first dose of medication and they made her comfortable. Charlie busied himself making rhubarb fool to the accompaniment of his Nina Simone CD. Lydia stretched out on the sofa with her notebook. Over her shoulder, Charlie saw a sketch titled Woolly Wide Web, with sheep at laptops and phones arranged at the points of an intricate web. I rather agree with the sentiment, Charlie said, and returned to spooning the dessert into bowls so it would set. The doorbell rang, and Charlie dropped the half-full mixing bowl. It clattered on its base. It's probably Ian, he croaked, pulling out his hand sanitizer. Lydia scrambled up. I know, but that means we'll find out something one way or another. She disappeared into the hallway. Charlie heard her open the door and say, Hello, Inspector, and Phoebe. I figured I'd see you around, but I didn't think... Charlie stood by Harriet as Lydia led the guests in. Riddle looked content as ever. He wouldn't look that way if he were about to arrest Charlie, would he? Beside him cowered a girl in a black hoodie, her face pale and grey eyes wide. Good afternoon, all. Riddle swept his hat off and sat on the settee by Lydia's notepad. Can I get you a drink? Charlie realised he was still rubbing his hands together and stopped. Just some cold water, thanks. Riddle turned to his young companion. Won't you sit down? But the girl remained hovering in the doorway. Is she one of yours then, Inspector? Lydia asked. No, mine are a bit younger. Miss Taylor's helping me on a case or two. I understand you're familiar with her photographs? Yes, I saw one. It was very good, Lydia replied, as Charlie placed 2 glasses of icy water on the coffee table. Riddle sipped his drink. Turns out she makes short videos as well, if you see what I mean. Charlie watched Lydia's expression go from polite bafflement to understanding and then back to confusion. You made the video, but... The girl's face reddened, and her fists twisted in her pockets like beating hearts. Something about her hunched fidgeting seemed familiar, and not just because Lydia had similarly slouched her way through secondary school. That dark, forlorn shape. Charlie's mind matched it with a memory against the backdrop of Fairford's exterior while he made his way toward the van after freeing Nicky. He almost felt traces of that elation again. He peered more closely and glimpsed strands of luminous orange hair beneath the girl's hood. You're Ginger, aren't you? A plump, overfed tear rolled onto her cheek. My God. Charlie moved toward her, then mastered the instinct to put his arms around the child. You poor thing, I'm so sorry. Ah, Harriet agreed, turning her head their way from her reclined chair. Sit down, Phoebe, Riddle repeated. There's nothing to be afraid of here. She obeyed, snuffling furiously, and Lydia handed her the box of tissues. Riddle explained, It was only when the bullying got quite out of hand, threats from dozens of classmates, vulgar rumours started by the dog's owner, only then did Phoebe share the video. She didn't want to side against you, Charlie, because she saw you were trying to do the puppy a favour. So much had happened since that afternoon in front of Fairford's. The angry perceptions of him had swamped Charlie's recollection of his own motives, yet suddenly a witness appeared to reflect his intent back at him. Charlie pushed his glasses up his nose. It was still a stupid thing I did. Lydia moved behind him to fuss with Harriet's chair, blushing inexplicably. And the other girl who owns the dog and her family, what do they think? The Harrows. Riddle gazed steadily at her. They've got a lot going on too. I think they'll want to keep a lower profile for a while. You mean... Charlie felt his way into an armchair without taking his eyes from his friend. You mean they might not press charges? I think the end is in sight. Phoebe folded her thin arms. The tissue crumpled in her grasp. Her voice was low and hard. They can't use my video again anyway. I won't let them. Charlie let his breath out before pushing on the armrests and getting back to his feet. What about some refreshment then? I've whipped up a nice cool pudding if everyone likes creamy rhubarb sorts of things. Riddle smiled. I knew you'd have something tasty for us. But first, Lydia, Phoebe wants to speak with you privately if you don't mind. One last thing to get off her chest, as the saying goes. Sure. I guess we'll pop into the hallway a minute. Lydia led Phoebe into the corridor, pulling the lounge door shut behind them. Riddle followed Charlie to the kitchen. Is that child all right? Charlie asked, laying the table with dessert spoons. I'll see about finding a support network for her. I brought her here to show her she has good instincts about people. You brought her here so she could make up for sharing the video and so I could feel less guilty about what I did in it. Charlie lifted the curtain of the back window and a shadowed glow streamed inside. Did it work? Heavy clouds bruised the last sunlight purple-grey before quashing it altogether. The leaves of a spindly willow down the street swooned silver side up like they always did in New England before a storm. If I come out of this all right, it won't be because of anything I've done, but because of people like you. I can make my peace with that. I hope so, Riddle said, and I intend to keep helping whether you feed me or not. Charlie laughed. Give it a few minutes to set. He brought Harriet's chair over. Look, babe, the storm's coming at last. Harriet smiled, and a latticework of rain fell, enmeshing the view. Riddle helped Charlie carry Harriet's chair to the garden, and Charlie wrapped his arms as far as he could around her, twirling her in the downpour. Rain splashed off the patio tiles, rivered down the wheelchair's sharp black frame, and bowed the heads of the shivering little herb garden. Deep in Harriet's throat, laughter gasped, and she lifted her head blissfully to drink the coolness in. If part of her truly had escaped to the river outside their old home, for moments, Charlie escaped there with her. That's the end of chapter 5, and I'm going to put chapter 26 up as well. And there's only 28 chapters, so we're very near the end.